Webinar. And now I'm going to hit go live on our Zoom. Maybe we'll give it a minute to let people kind of hop on.
Okay. Um,
Jesse, I'll cue you when we are live.
I feel like we're live, so I'm gonna start. So, Tanse, Kakio, Kita Tamskat Nawao, Jesse Cardinal Natsigasun, Keepers of the Water, Atoskian, Kikino, Otsinia. Tawao, welcome everyone to this very special event. I'm Jesse Cardinal, and I'm with Keepers of the Water. A bit about the organization. Keepers of the Water is an Indigenous-led organization and was formed in 2006 in a need to protect water. There have been many impacts to water due to extreme industries such as oil, gas, and big-scale agriculture. A declaration was made at that time in 2006, and it states that water is sacred and we must work to protect it. That is the work that the organization Keepers of the Water does. We are comprised of an Elders Wisdom Council, Board of Directors, and a small team of staff. To learn more about our work, please visit our website at keepersofthewater.ca, and you can like and follow us on Facebook and our other socials. So we are here today to talk about the criminalization of Indigenous land defenders, and we will introduce our guest shortly who will speak on this topic. Here in Alberta, it is the biggest oil and gas producer in the country of Canada. We have seen destructive impacts to the lands, waters, air, the animals, and of course, human health. We are experiencing extreme climate change occurrences due to the reckless extraction of resources. And I looked at a drought map the other day. A lot of Alberta is in drought conditions. Yes, we are getting little spitfires of rain lately, but it's drought. Also in BC, what is known as BC, they are also a large area in drought conditions. The tar sands, one of the biggest industrial projects on the planet, is located in Treaty 8 territory, north of Fort McMurray, and it extracts millions of barrels of fresh water every day, leaving trillions of liters of toxic waste on the landscape. The companies and the governments refuse to properly treat the waste, either because they don't know how or it costs a lot of money. Many of the industrial projects leave toxic waste forever on the landscape. This is one example of the destruction we are witnessing. With all of this, Danielle Smith and her Conservative government want to double the oil and gas production in Alberta. This will launch us into a crisis that we have not yet seen before. Our elders predicted this. They said that things will get worse, and we are dealing with greed and corruption at the cost of a healthy, sustainable society. We hear more this term oligarch, which is defined as someone who is extremely rich and powerful and has control over governments, and this power rests with a small number of people. Or we can also say it is fascism, a far-right political ideology characterized by ultranationalism, authoritarianism, and often militarism. It emphasizes the importance of the nation above individual rights, and it is characterized by a dictator leader, centralized control, and suppression of dissent. Some of these richest men in the world are funding wars right now that are killing thousands of innocent people, including children. This is happening as we speak. Indigenous people, Indigenous people have the solution to the future that we all deserve, one of clean water, of lush forests, of healthy ecosystems, and a society that thinks of everyone, the homeless, the children, the elders, the disabled. Canada has a choice to act in reconciliation, something that is long overdue. It is not a one-time payment or token actions. It has to be meaningful and long-lasting. Today, we have guests from the Wet'suwet'en who have for decades faced extreme violence from militarized RCMP. The Wet'suwet'en people are nonviolent and have been targeted because they occupy their territories, the same territories that these oligarchs or oilgarchs want to steal. And make no mistake, this is not to benefit us. This is to benefit them, the corporations that take from the lands and leave the destruction. So much has been extracted that there is enough money to sustain the world for thousands of years. So when they tell you we need this so you can have a job or food to eat, it is a lie. There are currently charges against Slato, who is here today, and others, for existing on their lands and territories, and they will share more about this. So we have a whole group of special guests. We have Chief Namox, Gwila Hamgabu, Shaylin, Slato, and we also have the defense attorney because Slato and a couple others, as I mentioned, have been charged. So the defense attorney will also be able to speak on what's happening there. And we have some folks from Amnesty International who are also supporting in the actions that are being taken, and they'll be able to share towards the end of our time together how all of you listening in can help. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us. Please put in the chat where you're listening in from. We always like to hear where all of our visitors and friends are listening in from. And thank you for joining us for our special time together with our guests. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Chief Namox. The bios will be put in the chat, but Chief, you can do a little introduction of yourself and I'll pass it over to you. Hi, hi.
Howdy, Denny's ate you, Saka's ate you, Sky's ate. I am Chief Namox. I am also caretaker of the name Chief Guise. I am a hereditary chief of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. We have 22,000 square kilometers of unceded, non-treaty, undefeated lands. We are the law and governance on the land. We had to prove that in a court case. First, we started in the British Columbia Supreme Court, and then we had to go to the Supreme Court of Canada. And on December 11th, 1997, the Supreme Court of Canada said, yes, you exist. Yes, your laws are there. Yes, your governance exists. And now Canada and British Columbia itself are ignoring it, all for industry, as you had stated. Like in our law, everything that we do is truly democratic. It starts with our people, the House members and the clan members. Then it comes to the nation. So everything that we do is holistic in our decision making and what it does for the future. Because always our elders, our chiefs, they've always told us that we're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for the next generations to come, the children, the grandchildren, and those who are yet to be born, and for the betterment of all. It doesn't just say for the Wet'suwet'en. It doesn't say just for the Indigenous people. It says for the betterment of all humans. In our governance system, when we make a law to protect land, air, water, humans, culture, it is the law that stands for centuries. And we, all the clans of the Wet'suwet'en, all 5 clans, have held feasts in our governance building, our feast hall. And we all said that pipelines and these extractive industries that are killing this planet are not allowed on our territory. And what does British Columbia and Canada do? With the support of industry, who is actually steering the government, helping us lose the democracy of this country, helping us to become a state and a police state. They make us criminals because we protect clean water, clean air, human rights, the very existence of humans on this planet. And everything that we do must look for the betterment for centuries, not just the pocketbook, as you had stated. When we have to take on provincial and federal governments and industries that are worth billions and trillions of dollars, that's where the violence comes from. You know, they use a template book from David Petraeus of KKR of how to take over countries. First thing they do is say that money is a weapon. Well, when they talk about economic reconciliation, that is a weapon. That is just a fancy word for bribing you and telling you to sell out your soul, your culture, your dignity, your pride, your history. For what, a dollar? That doesn't last very long, and most certainly does not benefit Indigenous people. Now they go out and they say, okay, these projects are Indigenous led. Well, we're not going to argue with our own people. You know, they intentionally put our people into the poorhouse and make sure that we're dependent on these governments and industry. But our law says we're above that. Our law says we will not go into the violent state that is coming at us. And our law also says that we will always be here and that we will always look forward to having a future for ourselves, for yourselves, for your children. You know, when we go into courts and when we face the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they often say common law. I can't help but think that common law does not have common sense. You know, if you have clean air, you have clean water, you have a future, you are healthy, you're willing to think on your own, you're willing to know who you are and what you can do. And you also know that your voice matters, that standing together makes a difference. They will use divide and conquer tactics at every level, from violence to laws that they make up and bend, and work against even the Constitution of this country to ensure that their projects go through. And yet there's no benefit to anybody on this planet, and most certainly not to ourselves. When we have to worry about the health and well-being of our children every time they go out onto our territory, that is not a democratic country. That is not a freedom that we live and enjoy. And we want to make sure that this next generation doesn't have to go through what we're going through. When we have to stand up and tell them that they're wrong and we tell our truth, out come the dogs, out come the helicopters, out come the snipers. They burn down our cabins. But we have every right to exist. We have every right to look to a clean future. And all we have done so far is follow our law. We've been peaceful. We have a right to be on our territory. We have a right to continue to live, to breathe, to adapt. But adapt doesn't mean give in, especially when they're trying to kill this planet. Especially when you got elected officials that are sitting in the pocketbook of industry and telling us that we're wrong because we simply want to survive. We've never wanted more than what we have. We simply want to protect what we have. And when we do the right thing, then it is best for everybody. And you have to realize that when you get governments and industry that come into this form of violence for this extended amount of time and actually changing laws to bend in their favor and then change the environmental laws, which are supposed to sustain us. And then it all goes down to who can make the most money in the shortest period of time by extracting things and destroying everything in its path. We get left with the mess every time. They get to go home. We are home. You are home. You have every right to speak up. You have every right to tell them that they're wrong. I can't help but think, how could they go home to their own children and explain what they do to their children with their extractive resources, be pipelines, oil and gas, mining, forestry, and say they're doing something for a pocketbook and not for the country that it's going to stay for. They're basically giving it away for free and actually giving them incentives to keep destroying this country, keep destroying the human rights, keep destroying the very freedoms and the rights that we have. When we say we have rights and title, we have rights to exist. Our title is our name. When we take on a traditional name, that is not something that is going to be there for an election cycle of 2 and 4 years. Those names are thousands of years old. And when we take on a name, we have to uphold the laws of humanity, of this planet, of our culture. When we say Kunga, that is a law, that is our trail, that is our history. But the Kunga that we have to leave for the future has to be better than what we're facing right now. And the only way that we could keep it better than the way it's going right now is everybody standing together, using their voices, and knowing they have every right to speak up, no matter what elected officials say. Even when they create Arms of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they make it a militarized version of it just to fight us for protecting clean water, clean air. You have a right to stand up no matter what they say. And remember, the strength is in yourself. Don't let them take that away from you. When you use your voice, when we stand together and we tell our truth, we win. And we are scaring them. They are scared because they are being so violent at this time. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to address you and really listen to the people that are talking because they're talking from experience. And we want to save you from experiencing what we had to go through. And I do encourage you to watch our film Yinta, because that is our truth. That is our story. To me, as hard as it is to watch that, I consider it a love story. That's a love story for humanity. That's a love story for this planet. And it's a love story for freedom. So, Masai, I thank you for this.
Hi, Chief Namox. It's always a pleasure to, share space with you. I know that you visited the Dene Nation last August and you met with many of the chiefs from the Dene Nation. There was chiefs from Inuvik area, the Gwich'in, and they all were, you know, very, very thankful that you and the delegation came up there because they are also experiencing similar things where there's more criminalization of just existing on the lands and territories that you have been born into. These are your inherent lands. And so I want to thank you for that. And they also, when we're talking about the criminalization of Indigenous people, BC created a whole police force called CERG just to it's called a critical response unit, and some of our speakers will speak more about it because these are the militarized RCMP who have been harassing the Wet'suwet'en people on their land. So we'll hear more about this special unit that was created just to harass the Indigenous people. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our next speaker, and we will have time for questions at the end. So as you're listening, if you have questions, save them and put them in the chat, and we will try to get to some of the questions. So the next speaker we have is Gwila Gabu, is his traditional name, Jesse Stopler, and welcome, Jesse. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Denise, Tsakoze, Skyze. Uh, I'm I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here and to address you. And it's always such a pleasure to listen to Denise and Amox and the wisdom that he brings to the table. And I'm very, very proud to be not just behind you, but beside all of you. And you know, the Marx had touched quickly on the issue of title and right. This is not an issue for Indigenous people. This seems to be an issue for the province and for the federal government. The Giksan and the Wet'suwet'en have an allyship, and in the 70s, many of our ancestors um, came together in unity and in fellowship, embracing not only Giksan and Wet'suwet'en culture and laws and protocols, but did this on behalf of Indigenous people around the world and started this litigation. It was dragging along for many decades, and I know personally many of our families grew up without their parents or grandparents at their side because they had to travel for such a long ways to be at the different courthouses. Um, First off in the BC Supreme Court, and then later on the Canadian Supreme Court, and this turned into the what's now known as the Delgamuukw court decision, which eventually was pried out of Canada's hands on December 11th, 1997. And it has changed the environment and the landscape for Indigenous people here and for Indigenous people around the world. I know we had met with Indigenous people in Brazil, in the Amazon, in the southern border of Mexico to Guatemala, and many other places that have since had an opportunity to advance their title cases. And and I feel very, very grateful for all of the hard work that was put into place. And collectively, I think many of us walked away from December 11th feeling as winners. And it took, if you fast forward um, a few years, it didn't take that long for not only, in our case, so-called British Columbia and the federal government, combined with the forces and fueled by money from industry, to question these very clear decisions. And Canada has since said, yes, you do have title and right, but we don't know what that means. And what was meant to be um, really about title and right, uh, inherent title to the rights to own, use, develop um, lands and resources, quickly turned into a mud fight of having to prove existence, first of all. I know there are many quotes coming out of this court case, but one that sticks with me was Yagala standing in front of the judge saying, look at me, listen to me. Can't you see me? I'm right here. But this was this was the situation. As Indigenous people, we didn't exist. And quite frankly, to this day, myself and pretty much everyone that's here is still known to Canada simply as a number. We can change our names and all of these other things. The one thing that doesn't change is a number that's printed on our ID cards. And you know, uh, I'm I'm really proud to see what has taken place since 1997. And I know the Haida have fought very hard with their title case, for example. And their decision making came down last year, even though the litigation started shortly after Delgamuukw was filed. So you see how many decades this takes to figure out something that seems to be very, very simple. And as Indigenous people, I I'm embarrassed uh, to admit to be not only Indigenous but to be Canadian. If this is how we treat the rightful owners, title holders of these lands, you know, we should have full access and jurisdiction over the lands and the resources as it was set out in the Supreme Court of Canada. And and we had to prove that these lands were never surrendered um, or transferred in any sort of treaty or agreement. They were never ceded. Um, and we do, as Giksan and Maturin, have a right to evolve, which was another piece that really stood out to me within the Delgamuukw court case, and and I remember the judge at some point had argued, not the judge, sorry, the lawyers had argued at some point that we as Indigenous people have lost our ways, and tried to prove that uh, by stating and questioning our people if they have windows in their houses and if they enjoy eating ice cream and and people were quick to answer yes to all of these questions. But that does not mean we have lost our ways as Indigenous people. Like any other human on this planet, we do have a right to evolve. But time after time, it seems like we do have to prove this. And constitutionally, this should have been settled in Section 35. And I think if you count the words, it's all of 17. It was made pretty clear. Thank you.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you for that. That's a whole big conversation in itself, and we are only here for a short time. We will be talking about the court case and just this constant, land theft. Even the Métis experienced it through script, and the rights and title. And what ends up happening is the nations have to spend millions of dollars in court to say we were always here, that we had governance systems before colonization. The word Canada is a Cree word. It means clean, because when the Europeans came here, they could not believe how clean the lands were. It was pristine. And through my teachings from the University of Blue Quills and the elders and knowledge keepers, there were governance systems, there were laws, there were kinships, clans, like all we were organized people. My First Nations ancestors were organized people. That's why, like, it wasn't just by chance that the lands were pristine. That was because it was purposeful in how we relation to the land, how we stewarded the land, and so when we say Indigenous people have the solutions for all of society to have a sustainable future, it's true. We shouldn't have to spend millions of dollars in court and 20 years for some colonial court to acknowledge that. But thank you for that. We're going to move to our next speaker, Slato. Many of you know Slato because she has been in the media for a long time. She's been on the front lines, in this struggle, experiencing many militarized RCMP raids. The Wet'suwet'en people are matriarchal. They're a matriarchal society, like many of the Indigenous societies were. And there's that decolonization that's happening where a lot of the communities are starting to return back to that matriarchal governance system where, the women lead, the women have the solutions, because we think of the children, we think of the elders, we think of the disabled. So when we're making our decisions, we make decisions with everybody in mind. Slato, who's gonna be speaking, is a leader. She is a matriarch. She is, I just like, have nothing but good things to say. I'm so honored to have you here, and I'm gonna pass it over to you to share your experiences of, the criminalization of Indigenous people and the police violence that you've been experiencing, and anything else that you would like to share.
Snikelia, Jesse. Denise Tsakaize Skyze Sai Slato Sydney Gidimden Hesley Wutsoten is Den. My name's Slato. My English name's Molly Wickham, and I hold the name in Cassia House, which is the grizzly bear house of the Wet'suwet'en Nation of the Gidimt'en clan. And I'm really excited to be here and so honored to be speaking with all of these people who I adore. And thank you so much to you, Jesse, and everybody who organized this webinar today. I just want to really uh, comment a little bit on what Jesse was just saying too about the Delgamuukw Stay court case and our Nuknuaten. Our Nuknuaten is our laws, our body of laws. And when I first moved home, I had been away in university for a number of years. I grew up displaced from my community because my mother was a victim of the 60s scoop. And so I didn't really have, I didn't grow up, even though I grew up on Wet'suwet'en territory, I didn't grow up with all of the teachings that a lot of people did. And so when I first moved back home, I started spending time working on some clan meetings back in 2009. And at that time, the treaty negotiators for the Wet'suwet'en were hosting all clans meetings and were hosting clan meetings. And so I attended many Gidimt'en clan meetings about the treaty. And one of the main things that I took away was a really good description and a really good understanding of the Delgamuukw Stay court case, and the fact that the courts can only bring us so far, and then we actually have to start living it. We actually have to start enacting it. And when we talk about, like what did the courts, that the courts in the Delgamuukw Stay court case and title is like, they don't know what title looks like. Nobody else knows what title looks like except for the Indigenous people who have title, and that's going to look different. So there's not one cookie cutter piece. And that's something that I think that I really took to heart when I moved home, and that was being shown to me by other Wet'suwet'en people like Hawaskat, like Frida, and Smogulgam, and people that were actually, just living it. They're like, we just need to do it. Nobody's going to give it to us. Nobody's going to tell us how to have title. Nobody can. We have to follow our Nuknuaten, and we actually just have to start enacting and implementing our title. We have to act like we have it because we do, and we actually have to just live it. And so I think when we're talking about criminalization, that is the repression of us enacting our title and our laws. And that is exactly what I have experienced over the last decade of first supporting Unistoten and their reoccupation of the territory and their resistance to pipelines, and then experiencing it more intensely firsthand myself after Gidimt'en also started to reoccupy and set up the first blockades in 2018. And so I think that this is a really important way to think about criminalization. And from my firsthand experience, this is exactly why we are seeing militarized repression of Indigenous people. And, I think oftentimes sometimes I struggle with the word, land defender or water protector. I think those are definitely things that we do. Obviously, that's built into our Nuknuaten, that's built into our laws and our governance structures. But I think for any Indigenous person who's protecting their own land, it's just who you are. It's just part of your responsibility. And, I lifted the name Slato in 2019, in March of 2019, which just happened to be after the first blockade, but it had nothing to do with the blockade. This was decided long before that ever happened. But that's when I lifted the name. And so my responsibility intensified. And I really learned and had been groomed to understand what my responsibility was as somebody who held a name in Gitumden Clan to the land and to the water. And so I think when we are criminalized as land defenders or criminalized as water protectors, we're being actually criminalized for being Wet'suwet'en. We're being criminalized for just being who we are. And when we think about it like that, it becomes really serious, and it's serious because being who we are means that we are protecting our land, that we're implementing our title. And so sometimes I struggle with this idea of, being in the court system and being on either side. So it's like people are using the court systems in lots of really good ways to help their communities and to protect their lands. And the way that I'm experiencing the court system is that this is meant to be a deterrent. As soon as we step into a colonial court, we are put in a box. We're either a criminal or we're not a criminal. We don't get to just be who we are. It doesn't matter that we are Wet'suwet'en. It doesn't matter that we're Giksan. It doesn't matter who we are as Indigenous people. Um, and the courts don't and cannot take that into consideration. And we've seen that with our own cases with Chief Sahel, where they made that argument that he is a hereditary chief. He is supposed to be taking care of the land. He's a caretaker of the land. And the judge ruled that there's just not room for Wet'suwet'en law and colonial law. Um, so I think that it's, being in that position has been quite an experience to know that there is no winning, even if we win, and I know that, our team, Francis and the rest of our team have worked extremely hard to keep us out of jail. And when I've talked to, our lawyers, and when I talk to other lawyers, I talk about this is what your job is that we're going to uphold our law. We're going to uphold our responsibility. We're going to enact Anakno 10 on our territories. And your job is to be the buffer. Your job is to keep us out of jail and keep them away from us so that we can just be who we are and live out our responsibilities. And I think that we've experienced so much, and I hope that that maybe Shay might talk more about the Kurg and the crew, but this, for people who don't understand, is really at the heart of colonization. This is a real representation of current day colonization and genocide from the state, and of this type and this level of repression from a paramilitary group who has unlimited funding, who has, they get to act with impunity at all times when they're dealing with Wet'suwet'en people, when they're dealing with Indigenous people, and the Giksan people, our closest allies and neighbors and family members, are about to experience the exact same thing that we've gone through for the last decade because of the proposed pipelines through their territories. And so one of the reasons why we fought so hard and why we brought the abusive process against the RCMP is because they have acted so violently towards us. They have acted just with impunity. They act and they know that they can just do whatever they want to us. They have become very, very violent over the years, an increasing level of violence. And we know that that's going to affect other people, other Indigenous people, and that we know that that will continue to affect us. And we have been living with the consequences, of year after year after year of violence, intimidation, harassment, to the point where our people have limited access to the territories where private security who act like RCMP um, also block us from the territories, threaten arrest. We've had so many arbitrary detentions. There's just been like, I think over 75 arrests within the last 4 years, 5 years in our territories. And so we're looking at extreme repression from this, from the state who has just handed over the keys to dealing with Indigenous people. When it comes to private industry, they are only there. They're specifically designed um, to protect private industry. And so when we look at the history of colonial laws, and who was deemed criminal. Our most sacred healers in the past, our house chiefs, were, sent off to mental institutions and never seen again because of their powers. That was a crime to be spiritually powerful. Our people were jailed for practicing our governance system and the potlatch system. They went to jail and they still did it. They were criminalized for it. All of the criminalization has always just been a repression of us and who we are and acting out who we are as Indigenous people. And so this is meant to be a deterrence. And I say, Jesse actually gave me this, had a good talk with me one day at court and just said, this is a celebration. Let's celebrate. We're not criminals. We are amazing Indigenous people who have Anak Nuatan behind us, who have our ancestors behind us, who have all of the ways of being that we know inherently that we have a right and responsibility to. And let's celebrate that despite what comes, despite whatever repressive tactics they use next and continue to use. We're going to continue to celebrate who we are and the fact that we are upholding our responsibility as Indigenous people. Masai.
Hi, segue everybody. Put out the segues. That was just what we needed to hear. Slato, is there's the two sides of it, right? There's what the colonizers are doing. That's them. That's who they are. They are the violence. They are the oppression. They are the shame. That's not for us to carry. So even like the reserve systems, the pass system, like that just goes on to what you were talking about, where you could be arrested if you left these small plots of reserve land. But now we have these lands that were set aside called traditional territories. Under colonial, they call it crown land. And that's exactly what people need to do. Go back to the land. Not to the small reserves. Go back to the land. What's known as crowned land is Indigenous traditional territory. Your community has traditional territory. You have a right to be there. You have a right to be living there, occupying there, hunting, fishing, harvesting, all of these things. And then we talk about the criminalization of this is the only solution that the colonial government has, and it's getting more violent. But we look back, and I think of one case because I did a bit of research on the criminalization of Indigenous land defenders or just Indigenous people. And I want to highlight the Paulette case or the Berger inquiry. And that was back in the 70s, I think. Francois Paulette, he's on our Elders Wisdom Council. Many of you know him. He helped to lead this. He was the chief at the time, and they wanted to put the Mackenzie pipeline through all of Northwest Territories. And what the federal government did at that time was they called for a national inquiry. That to me is a model that Canada can adopt, rather than let's just send out our goons and go beat everybody up and forcefully remove them from their own lands. What the Berger inquiry was Thomas Berger was put in charge of it. And he went to all of these communities, and I talked to Francois. He said this guy would even go to people's houses. He had to have translators, of telling them about what was being proposed and how did they feel about it, how would it impact them. In the end, that pipeline didn't get built. Why? Because the people didn't want it. And so that's what we need to come to terms with, is that no is an answer, and that needs to be respected. So we're gonna move on to our next speaker, Shaylin. And this is about, bringing our youth, like, it's so important to teach our youth in what we're doing. Many of our youth, as we know, one of the elders called it like a spiritual war, what's happening with the drugs in our community. But there's also many beautiful things happening in our community, and we need to bring our youth into that, into speaking the language, going to ceremonies, learning songs, learning to be on the land. So when we talk about being on the land, like how Slato and our visitors are here, it's nothing like like you're not always like doing like being on the land is ceremony. Just itself being on the land, because you're connecting right with the wind, the sound of the wind, the sound of the water, like it's engaging our five senses. So just bringing our youth to the land is showing them they're becoming a part of understanding why it's important to be connected to the land. It helps heal their mental health, physical health, spiritual health, and their emotional health. So I'm gonna pass it to our youth speaker, Shaylin, who has been on the front lines with Slato, to share some of your experiences. Hi, hi.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thanks for asking me to be involved. Singigat Sigadam Hanach Gangabuksa, Yomfgori Wangaan. My name is Shaylin Sampson. I come from the Giksan Nation, from the Lac Gibu, Spoch, which is the Wolf Clan and House of Spoch. And yeah, I've spent the last 5 or so years living on and supporting the Wet'suwet'en frontline at the Gidimt'en checkpoint specifically. I've also spent the last roughly 5 years being mentored by Slato. And I feel like my journey of radicalization and being more involved in my community and my culture, I've seen this like uphill slope of criminalization. And so it's really interesting for me to look back now, because there were times in my life where I was really like much younger and looking for solutions within these colonial systems. And as I've strayed away from following the path of these colonial systems, there's been an increase in criminalization, and the impacts of that on my life. I, in 2020, was at the legislature in Victoria, with a group called Indigenous Youth for Wet'suwet'en. This was after the second militarized raid on Wet'suwet'en territory. And there were actually Indigenous youth from over 40 different nations from across the world. So this happened because the youth really saw ourselves in the fight of the Wet'suwet'en and seeing what was happening on their territory, this fight not only against colonization, but also this fight against industry that is threatening our territories. And so, looking at that as a youth, it was really important for me as a young Giksan person, knowing that we had this ancient alliance with the Wet'suwet'en, an alliance that predated colonization. It was really important for me to be there and standing in solidarity and doing what I could in my own backyard, which is where, I was in Victoria. That's where I was living at the time. And so it was really important to be in like the colonial center of this province and to take a look at what could we do there. And so we went to the legislature, we made our voices known, and it was a really empowering space during the time that we had that occupation to have Indigenous youth from all over collectively organizing and standing up and saying what happens to the Wet'suwet'en has an impact on all of us. And knowing that it was never just a fight about one pipeline, it was never just a fight about one nation, but it was a fight that had an impact on all Indigenous youth all over the world and all people all over the world. It wasn't just about Native people. We're also fighting for the future of non-Native people. um, So that space was like really incredibly important. And there were 5 arrests that happened of Indigenous youth that were demanding that the provincial government would speak with the Wet'suwet'en, which at the time they were denying um, that to happen. And so I think in just reflecting on the work that I've been doing for the last like 5 to 7 years, I really see the youth as like a powerful and upcoming movement. I've seen this so many times. And if you look at different revolutions or different movements of resistance around the world, there's always a strong contingent of youth, of university students, of young people um, that are standing up because we're looking at our future. We're saying that capitalism and greed is not what is securing clean air and clean water for the future generations. um, After the legislature occupation, I did move to the Yinta. And like everyone's been saying, moving to the land and being out on the land is so healing. I feel like that's really where I found myself. And I found connection to culture, to ceremony, to land and water, um, which completely changed the trajectory of my life. I had very different plans for myself. When I moved to the Yinta, I had planned to go back to school and go to law school and fight it from the inside, but that's obviously not where I am now. Um, I ended up staying on the Yinta for the last 5 years and have, like I said, experienced increased police violence at the hands of the Community Industry Response Group, also known as CERG, which has recently changed their name to the Community Response Unit, the Crew. Whatever the name is, we know that the symbolization of that group means violence against Indigenous people, against people of color. Um, they've recently started using the crew to respond to pro-Palestine rallies in the cities. And so, if we're looking at the fight of Indigenous people, it's not just the fight of Indigenous people here, it's globally. You know, there's international solidarity between Indigenous people that's really important to uphold. And so for me, that looks like standing in solidarity with Palestine and the people fighting back there, and knowing that my fight here against the pipelines that are starting to go through our land is connected to Palestine's fight against Israel. And I think that's important to name because all of these systems of oppression are connected. um, and that's a very tangible connection here within these territories, is knowing that the crew or SERG is being used not only to fight against us in this one realm of colonization, but also supporting a global colonization of Indigenous people. In 2021, I was at the Coyote Camp blockades, and that's one of the raids where we saw huge mobilizations of militarized police. They had attack dogs, they had snipers hidden in the trees. They arrested 30 people within 2 days in a 2 day operation that spanned over 60 kilometers. They had what we call green guys falling from the sky. They were dropping people from the sky in helicopters to come and surveil us. They cut off all radio and Wi-Fi and telephone communications between the people that they were arresting and the outside world. And so, you know, all of these things have an impact on people's well-being, on their spirit. I think being like a few years out from that raid in particular and still having a number of police experiences between now and then is it causes a lot of burnout for our people. It causes a lot of burnout for the people on the front line and the people that are supporting us. Molly and Frida and Namox, like they've been at this for over a decade now. And I'm lucky to still be young and to be able to take time away and have some breaks. But it is exhausting to keep on moving forward with it. Alongside, after their arrest, we've been put through 3 years in the colonial court system, which is really draining. And to have to go in and relive these moments of great trauma in a system that wasn't built for us, in a system that actually was specifically designed to undermine our governance our governance that holds us when something happens, when something goes wrong. Our governance is meant to hold us and correct the behaviors if something's happened. And so now we're in this punitive and carceral system and spent time in jail and, just separated from our community, in front of people that don't know anything about our people or our culture or what we're fighting for, people that have never drank the water from the river. Um, and so, it takes a lot out of you and it takes a lot of time to recover. And it's no wonder that our people are so burnt out and grieving among all of this. We continue to lose people and youth specifically to all of the crises facing our communities. Um, but there are, I think, a lot of things to look forward to still, like the youth and the generations upcoming. I feel really excited to be a part of this fight, and I honestly feel like everything that I've learned from being on the Wet'suwet'en front line will help me and my people and other youth that I can share that knowledge with. On Gyeongsang Lahyip right now, we're facing another pipeline called the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission. It's slated to go right through the Kispiox Valley, drill underneath the Kispiox River and the Skeena River, much like they drilled underneath Wadzinkwa, the sacred headwaters. And I don't think it's an accident that they're targeting two of the strongest nations with the strongest legal standing against the colonial government to trample through our territories and use Indigenous people against each other to do it. Um, there's a big fight coming up, and the youth are preparing. I'm part of a new youth group called the Lahyip Firekeepers. Um, so this is a youth group for anyone on Gyeongsang Lahyip under 35 to be involved. We're actually having a community meeting about the impact of the pipeline today because we are anticipating an approval from the government any day. And I've actually heard that the pipeline is getting ready to hire contractors to start doing that work to degrade our territories even further from what they've already done from logging and other industries on our territory. Um, yeah, I think the government is fighting really hard to push through these colonial projects right now with the threat of fascism in the South. I think it's really important to note that we can't fight fascism with more fascism. We have to be explicitly anti-fascist in the nature moving forward. We have to be thinking about our territory and our water. And Indigenous people have done this for thousands of years. And I think it's something that we need to continue uphold. And that people that are non-native also need to see themselves in this struggle and pick up the fight as well. It can't be just Indigenous people. It has to be us working together and working in the ways that we know how to fight back against these projects. Hamia.
Hi, Shaylin. You said what I was gonna say about the allies. It's so important. Like, it's not just Indigenous people to carry this, that the allies need to be out on the lands. And when we're talking and I'm listening to people talk, it's like it because of that criminalization, there's this stigma that if you're on your lands and territories where the government has zoned off as like crown lands or whatever, that you're doing something illegal, that you're a criminal, that you're violent, when what we're trying to do today, and through the film The Yinta and other things, is the beauty of the people, the beauty of Indigenous people. That's part of the propaganda that helped with the genocide of Indigenous people, that Indigenous people are dumb, that they're alcoholics, that they're this and this and that. But there's this whole other beautiful side of Indigenous people. In the Cree teachings, the first law, the first Cree law is to love one another. The second is to help one another. There's so much that we can learn from every nation, and every nation has their own teachings, and it's all beautiful. And I believe that's why Canada has been, a peaceful country overall, where a lot of people feel safe, because we have brought in our values. Like, Canada tried to, like, pick pieces of our teachings and bring them into their colonial system, which hasn't worked. But I just want to thank the Indigenous people, because I do feel like this is part of why it's such a beautiful place to be. And I could go on, but I'm gonna move to the next speaker because I want to save time for questions for everybody listening in. If you're still with us, we are here till 1:30, so we have two more speakers. So the next one that we have is the defense attorney. As Slato was talking about that, you know, they do work with lawyers, and what they would like the lawyers to do is to keep that separation, to keep them safe so that they can just be on the land, you know, picking berries or whatever you can do, you know, there's so many things to do on the land. And so I'd like to welcome Francis Mahone, and I'll pass it over to you, Francis, to share a little bit because you know, Slato and Shaylin talked about being charged several times, and there's a current court case going on. So please share a little bit about that with us. Thank you. Hi, hi. Francis, your sound is not working. We did do a sound check, so it will work. I say it's the Mac folks, uh, but we'll see. No, I can't hear you. She was her sound was working earlier, so
How's that, Jesse?
it's great. There you are.
Okay, my apologies. Uh, I am the defense lawyer for Slato and Shaylin. I've been working in solidarity with members of the Wet'suwet'en Nation and the Gitxsan Nation and other Indigenous nations for quite a long time. I have been very privileged and honored not just to work as a lawyer in solidarity with the nations, but to be educated about Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan law. I'm very grateful to the hereditary chiefs of both nations to take me out to the Yinta and to give me their teachings that have gone back thousands of years and educate me about the governance structure. It's been one of the greatest honors of my life. I want to go back first to the Delgamuukw court case, and my observations have been that the Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan people have such incredible pride about the accomplishments that they had, despite the many barriers to working within a colonial legal system. But at the same time that that case was going through the British Columbia courts and up to the Supreme Court of Canada, we also saw this growth in British Columbia of extractive industries using injunctions, which is a form of civil law, to criminalize Indigenous people and their allies who were attempting to uphold their sovereignty and their own laws. An injunction is meant to be a tool of the civil law. It was never really meant or thought to be a tool to actually criminalize people. But since the early 80s, we've seen this dramatic increase both for the Wet'suwet'en, also for the Secwepemc, and the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And what the injunction has become is a very, very blunt tool. And it's being used to force these proud nations into compliance with colonial law, quite unsuccessfully, I might add. And we have, and one of my goals has been not only to learn as much as I can, but to attempt to educate our courts and the judges that we're appearing in front of about the proud history of the nations, their language, the land, and their governance structures. And I do think we've had some success in that regard. We've also been able to target the racist actions of the Kurg, known as the Crew. But we've been unable to actually use the Anaknoten or Wet'suwet'en law to defend people against the imposition of criminal law onto them. So on the one hand, we see this acceptance through the Delgamuukw court case, this recognition of longstanding sovereignty and title and governance. But on the other hand, uh, the inability of the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan to use that law to uphold that sovereignty and to enforce the ancient law of trespass on their territories. That only, unfortunately, becomes relevant after people have been convicted of crimes and are being sentenced. And the expression I think of is that this is the tail wagging the dog, because if we refuse to understand those laws and to apply those laws at the front end, what is the point of doing it at the back end? We use it in order to reduce the punishment that Indigenous people would face. But why do we not rely on it to eliminate that criminalization for upholding sovereignty and for upholding the law? So all we can do and all we've really been able to accomplish is to act as that buffer, as Slato said. We've had mostly success at doing that, but also this education piece, because although the courts refuse and in their views can't rely on Indigenous law to prevent this criminalization, nonetheless, we've seen, or I've seen, this increasing willingness by judges to at least recognize it and incorporate it and just into their behavior into the courtroom. So the judge that we've been appearing in front of, for example, we've seen this progression where he started actually using Wet'suwet'en language, using the proper names of the hereditary chiefs, referring to the sacred river, the Wet'suwet'en, by its actual Wet'suwet'en name. And so this kind of education, while it's not having much impact right now for Slato and Shaylin's court case, that is going to continue on into the future. And so I think that has been one of the successes that we've had. I'll now speak a little bit about where we're at with the court cases. I'll start with Slato and Shaylin's case. So they were both arrested in November 2021. That was the time that I got involved to work in Solidarity. It's been a very, very long time since then, and I really want to echo what Shaylin said in particular about how draining it's been for the people that have had to sit in court, to watch videos of their violent arrest, and to re-experience that trauma in order to defend themselves. It's horrible. It's horrible for me, and I didn't actually live through those events on the ground. So where we're at now is Slato and Shaylin were found guilty of criminal contempt in January of 2024. And at that time, we brought an application to actually stop the proceedings against them because of the violent and racist misconduct by the special arm of the RCMP. And we did have some success with that. We got a decision just this past February where the judge acknowledged that the police had broken the laws that are part of the Canadian Constitution, specifically because of racist language that was used towards Slato and Shaylin in particular, and a violent attack on the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people for the symbols that they were wearing proudly on the day that they were arrested. And now where we're at is we're moving on to the sentencing process, or the tail wagging the dog process. That will happen October 15th, 16th, and 17th on Gitumden territory in Smithers, British Columbia. I really encourage anybody who's in the area or is able to travel to actually come up and to witness that. The other case that's been happening simultaneously is, and Slato referred to this briefly earlier, is Chief Zahale, who's a hereditary chief for the Laksamshu clan. He was arrested in October 2021 for enforcing the law of trespass on his territory. He used as his defense that he was relying on Wet'suwet'en law, and specifically the law of trespass, and should not be criminalized for that reason. The judge rejected that defense, and there's many other court decisions involving many other Indigenous nations that have taken that same principle. We have filed an appeal of that decision, and that appeal will be heard here in Vancouver on October 22nd of this fall. So again, I encourage you, if you're here, everybody can come to court and actually watch it. Again, this is going to be an opportunity for me to educate the judges just about what Wet'suwet'en law is, how the hereditary chief governance structure works, and how the feast hall governance structure works as well. And also just to impress upon these judges that this is not just some sideline to Canadian colonial law. This is law that has been here long, long before the settlers, like my own ancestors. So I'm looking forward to that, and I will continue to be that buffer between my wonderful clients and the colonial law. And sometimes I express that as a movement lawyer as being the hammer in the fist of my clients, because that's really what I can do is take direction from the nations that I am supporting and translating that into language that the courts hopefully one day will be able to accept. So thank you very much, Jesse, for asking me to be here. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Francis. That really helps in understanding the court case a bit better. I just want to acknowledge Judge Ladisher, because you were talking about this judge that, is starting to use the traditional names. And there's a judge in Alberta. He's in the St. Paul court, I believe, but he's from the community of Fort Chipewyan. He's a Nehiyaw Cree man, and he speaks his language. He's a fluent speaker. He's a judge, and he is really transforming the way that he's working to transform the justice system, because it is so colonial. It's not restorative justice. It's criminalizing people. We can get into that whole conversation of high incarceration rates of Indigenous people, over incarceration, decriminalization. This is one example here today. And one of the things that he does in court is you don't have to like swear on the Bible. You can use an eagle feather. And so he's working with, a lot of the staff. There's Wyoming Dion, Mona Cardinal, my auntie Mona Cardinal, and they're working with Judge Ladisher to try and help educate the lawyers, the other judges, that there are better ways of doing things, that we can sit in circle, we can talk, and so I like that how you mentioned that's happening there as well, and in ways where the judge is at least using traditional names. So thank you for that. So our last speaker, and then we'll open it up for a couple of questions, is Erin O'Reilly Odell, and she is with Amnesty International. So Amnesty International has been supporting Slato, Chief Namox, and the others in what's happening. So Erin, if you can tell us a bit about who is in Amnesty International, what do you do, and how have you been supporting, and how can others help support in, what's happening? Because of course we want to see the opposite of criminalization, and we want to see Indigenous people being able to be on the land, because if there's Indigenous rights, like what people were saying, like this is setting a precedent. If this is allowed to happen here, it's going to be allowed to happen in other places. And if there's Indigenous rights and they're respected, then other rights will be respected. That means that there's like a just, healthy, safe society. So that's what, to me and to everybody, like to a lot of other people, Indigenous rights, that's what it equates to. And I hope people understand that. But I'll pass that over to you, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. And thank you for having me in this space today. I am here from Amnesty International, our Canada branch, and our English-speaking section. I'm based in Toronto. I've had the tremendous honor to get to know and hear many stories from our panelists, and I'm very grateful that you've invited me into this space. And I'm grateful that I've been able to get to know the Yinta and drink from the Wasinqua and get to know the stories, and that you've welcomed me so much into your land, into your community, to be able to be a partner. So Amnesty International is an international organization, but also a global movement of over 10 million people in 170 countries. We have branches in different countries, like our branch, that look at human rights issues being faced by any individuals that are in that border. So ours is the so-called Canada branch, where we look at human rights issues that are being faced by people who are impacted by Canadian government decisions, provincial government decisions, or any impacted individuals within the land. So we've been able to, we work at a human rights framework. So the basis of our work is that we are working towards a world where everyone enjoys the rights that's in the United Nations Declaration for human rights, but also other human rights instruments like UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, which includes the right of self-determination. So we use the international rights, especially as a framework, and it's especially helpful when the Canadian government or other governments are not abiding by their own laws. And we have these international laws that when the laws of the country are unfair, we can rely on the international law and customary law of the international community that Canada has signed on to, which they are bound to and bound by. So we use that as a larger framework in addition to the laws of Canada and show where Canada might be breaching their national and international obligations. So with self-determination, and that is located in all declarations in the first article, it's the right to self-govern, the right to make decisions about the land. It's the right to have free, prior, informed consent over activities that impact life, the land, the water, cultural activities, any life impact that is going to happen on the land. Indigenous people have the right to have free, prior, and informed consent. So we've engaged in a collaborative recording of events, otherwise in a colonial term called a research report, with the Wet'suwet'en people in 2023. And we did that so that we can share and speak as one voice and say, Amnesty has been there, Amnesty can say, along with these voices, that this is what's happening in Canada. So we demonstrated how Canada and BC governments did not uphold international law or Canadian law in obtaining the proper consent from Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, which had resulted in unlawful injunctions, militarization, and criminalization of folks on their own land. We shared the stories in the report about the unlawful injunctions, the brutal militarization, and used an international law framework to show how Canada is failing its obligations legally. And then we take that and use it as an advocacy tool. So we advocate to the BC and federal government for changes in the way economic development projects are being approved. And to recognize, as BC courts recently have, that there is systemic discrimination against Indigenous people that's inherent in policing systems, which has to be recognized, which has to be addressed, and has to be removed. It's crucial to us as an ally to recognize Indigenous people should not be fighting on their own and should not be fighting for the protection of their land on their own, and should not be the only shareholders of the knowledge of their experience of colonialism. And it's the responsibility of the rest of us to learn, to share that knowledge, to hold it together, and to act together. And we need to act as well and be allies and stand firm. So what we've done as Amnesty, we've shared the story of the Yinta and what is happening, the criminalization through our Right for Rights campaign, which is a letter campaign that's global, and to ask the world to pay attention. Please pay attention to what's happening. Canada has this reputation. It's lovely. Canada must enjoy it so very much in the world that they abide by human rights. They are a human rights advocate. They're a strong human rights country. But that's not the reality of what's happening here. And a lot of people around the world don't know that. And so sharing the story and having Chief Nawaks and Slato and Shay and everyone share their stories with the rest of the world, we were able to say, look at what's happening. This is Canada's reality. This is the reality of how they treat people here. And it's also the reality of how they treat people abroad, because Canada has companies abroad that are impacting Indigenous people in a staggering way. And Canada has a responsibility for companies that are within its borders, for how it acts with its own police, but also beyond its borders to Indigenous people around the world. So over 26,000 people wrote letters of solidarity to Wet'suwet'en people to say, we heard your story, we hear you, and also wrote 600,000 letters directly to Premier Eby to ask them to stop criminalizing. So what can we do? We have lots of forms to write directly to Premier Eby if you'd like on our website. You can download a petition. We'll give you all the language. You can send a letter directly there if you'd like. Share the report, share the Yinta documentary with others. Tell why it's important. Tell your government that the criminalization of Indigenous people is not acceptable. When we're looking at the next chapter, the sentencing is in the fall. Amnesty International designated Chief Sahel as the first ever prisoner of conscience. For Amnesty International, we will make a lot of noise and we'll do it again. We will make a lot of noise to say it is not okay to criminalize individuals and hold them in their house or in jail, either house arrest or jail time, solely for political, religious, or consciously held beliefs or an unchangeable characteristic about themselves. They have not used violence and they are being detained, and it's unlawful. And so we hope that there's no need, but if it happens again in the fall, where anyone has house arrest or jail time, then we're prepared to also declare prisoners of conscience again. As we look to the new federal government, it's a good time to be vocal, especially to this new government who is making on one hand statements about how Indigenous people will be respected, but also on the other hand about really, really fast economic development and national projects. So this is a good time to be very vocal to the federal government, to have several asks. One, that there is no economic development, no resource extraction at the expense of human rights, at the expense of Indigenous people's consent, and at the expense of their obligations under human rights, under international law, to have proper consent from Indigenous people. Also, recognize Indigenous legal systems. Recognize self-determination fully with Indigenous governance and Indigenous legal systems at a time where it's crucial, where they want to have economic development. Tell the PM, tell the Prime Minister's office loudly, tell your federal government, tell your provincial government very, very loudly. If you want help in how to do that, shoot us a message. We are always available. And on our website, we have letters that you can download to send the messages right away. So it's important that allies please learn and please act. And that's what I would say. And thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Erin. We'll get the links from you so that we can share them with folks as well. Because I know we're live, but many other people will be watching this when they have time, so the word will definitely get out there. And I just wanted to touch really briefly on, just remind people of the COVID times. And I talk about this. That became evident of what's important for people. And it was not only Indigenous people, but where you couldn't leave your community because of, you could get arrested for driving on the highway, whatever they were putting in, but people were scared of this virus. And, and rightfully so, it was, pretty lethal. But what did people need? What did we need to survive? We needed access to water. We needed access to food. And access to our medicines. So there was a big resurgence back to the land at that time. Many Indigenous people were learning about the medicines because there's medicines that can help cure colds, that can help keep you healthy, that was helping with anxiety. So there was this big resurgence back to the land. Communities were sending out hunting parties because the elders couldn't leave. They, the grocery store shelves were going empty. And so they were sending out hunting parties where people would go and get moose. And so it was like, well, where are the moose? Is there enough moose to feed the people? and so it was a wake-up call that that's what we need. These are the things that we need as a society. We need clean water, we need access to food, access to medicines, and that is on the land. And so I just wanted to remind people like why it's important, our connection to the land. And so I want to thank you, Erin, for that, really being a good ally and showing up in numbers. You said 600,000 people sent a letter to the Premier of BC in support of this, and we hope to get more to show that this is a worldwide international issue. The world is watching on what's going to happen, and Sligo, they represent all of the Indigenous peoples in on the lands that are going back to their traditional territories to harvest, to hunt, and and to be on the land. And so with that, one last thing I want to mention, that I'm going to open up the floor really quick, is the traditional names. I really respect you all for returning back to traditional names. I think of when, because we were all fluent speakers, like I should be a fluent Cree speaker, Nehiawe, when we should all be speaking our language fluently. And 2 generations ago, our ancestors did. 3 generations ago, our ancestors did. Both my Mushims attended residential school, and when they went to these schools, all they could speak was their language. And we've heard so many stories of how difficult it was for them to learn the English language, and they were beaten for that. And so when we're learning, reclaiming the languages, I really challenge people to speak the traditional names of people, like Guilaham Gabu, is Jesse's traditional name, and it means it's an all traditional being. All of these names have meaning, and what Slato said, once you're given a name, once you're given your name, becomes a greater responsibility, right? Like because you're given your name for a reason, and it guides you. And so to really challenge not only Indigenous people to learn your own language, but like how this judge, he's trying to learn this language as well. I encourage you to keep doing these kinds of things. And so I have a couple minutes. Any last thoughts or comments that folks want to share on our panel, and we'll wrap up for the day. Chief Namax, do you have any last comment? Slato?
For myself, it's like I appreciate so much everything that was stated today, and because he talked about history, you got to realize with the Wet'suwet'en, we're the last in Canada to have European contact. That's how we protected our land. It's less than 150 years, and look what they've done. And if we stand together, we speak together, like-minded, like-hearted people, we can make the difference. When you get a government that's steered by industry, that is not democratic at all. And then we make a difference here in British Columbia, here in Canada, here in North America. We actually make a difference throughout the world. We've had the opportunity to go out and meet people from around the world. And when it comes to culture, it all comes down to the basic things of land, air, water. That's where everything depends on. And if you got industry and governments that are willing to kill people so that they could extract and kill the very environment that we all depend on, we have that right to stand up, and we are not criminals. We're upholding laws. Anak nula 10. That means our law, our way. And that comes from the earth. That does not come from elected governments, and it certainly does not come from industry. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to offer Slato to close us with closing comments, and thank you all for joining us today.
Snake Helia, everybody. I just wanted to address one of the comments and questions about how to get youth involved. And this is something that maybe Shay would have been able to answer, but also I think it's really important for our leaders and our people who are involved in this movement to mentor the young people, to really have them side by side, teaching them everything that we know about how to conduct ourselves, how to protect our land, how to uphold our responsibility, because we can't do this forever. We need to be passing it down just like that it was passed down to us. And so that's such an important piece of growing our movement, and that our movements are growing and they will continue to grow. And the more repression we see, the stronger and the more our movements will grow in response to that. And so I feel, like people should get ready for this next generation that's going to be more powerful and stronger than us in their connection and their resistance. And thank you so much for having this panel today. Awitsa Masai.
Hi, hi. Have a good day, everyone. Mio Kiksapayo. See you all soon.